Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a card game that has had a variety of different influences for the design of cards, whether that be entire archetypes based on children's books, or individual cards borrowing inspiration from other anime. We even see the influence of real-life culture with the Egyptian gods. Not many people know that Egyptian god cards are actually servants of the real Egyptian gods. So what about a trio of gods that are actually based on a real-life pantheon? Enter the The Aesir gods are a trio of monsters that are based on Norse mythology, where each respective god has their own sub-archetype, which allows each Nordic god to be summoned using a specific tuner. In the anime, there are divine beast monsters, where in the OCG and TCG they have different monster typing and attributes. The Aesir name from each of the card originates in Norse mythology, which refers to the pantheon of deities, which includes the list of Odin, Thor, and Loki. In the anime, they are found by 3 duelists, who each end up wielding their own Aesir god. They are found in a cave surrounded with tree roots, whilst not confirmed are most likely a reference to the Yggdrasil, which in Norse mythology is a world tree, which connects 9 worlds and basically ties the universe together. Out of all the god trios in Yu-Gi-Oh!, they're actually the only pantheon that is the representation of the actual real-life gods themselves that they're based on. If you take the Japanese name of each Egyptian god and take the translation, their name translates to Sky Dragon of Osiris, Giant God Soldier of Obelisk, and Winged Dragon of Ra. This implies that instead of each god card being the actual god themselves, they're rather servants of them, where instead, with the Norse gods, they're the Norse gods themselves. From an initial glance at the 3 cards, they all require a tuner from their own sub-archetype, which can probably tell causes issues, when you end up not being able to choose which god you go into. They also all share the same revival effect, where if they're destroyed by the opponent's card and sent to the grave, you can revive it for the measly cost of 1 sub-archetype tuner. However, the effect itself is pretty poorly designed. It requires the monster to be sent to the grave, so any card that banishes or bounces a card heavily restricts the utility of the revival effect. This could be overlooked if it wasn't also for the fact that the revival itself is pretty slow. It's at the end of the turn, and that the cost for revival is extremely heavy, even during slower formats, such as the time period it was released. You would most likely have 1 or 2 of the tuners for this revival effect in your grave, meaning that this effect is going to be used at most once. We'll begin with the first of our Norse pantheon, Thor, Lord of Aesir. He's a level 10 synchro monster, with 3500 attack and 2800 defense, with the effect to negate every effect your opponent's monsters controls. He has the revival effect with the cost of banishing 1 Nordic beast tuner from the grave, and burning the opponent for 800. What you'll notice with Thor is his attribute and typing, Earth and Beast Warrior, which given that Thor is the god of thunder, would make sense for him to have a thunder-like typing. Despite Konami fumbling this opportunity, there's another cool explanation for the typing. As you may know from the MCU, Thor protects Midgard, also known as Earth, which is a pretty creative way to represent this piece of lore. The Beast Warrior typing is a bit more of a stretch however, but it could reflect Thor's more warrior-like nature, as one of the most powerful gods in the Norse pantheon. His effect to negate the opponent's monsters can also support this warrior-like aspect of Thor, as on a battlefield, he would be virtually unstoppable, with no other god or human able to reach his might. The power of the card on the actual Yu-Gi-Oh! Field is a different story however. His primary effect of negation is extremely lackluster. For the heavy investment going into the card, effect negation can be a decent effect for a boss monster, but with one that requires this much setup, and at time of release, requires a specific tuner, that meant that more often than not, the effect negation would be used suboptimally. Another problem with this heavy cost to summon this card is that by the time you're able to summon Thor, all the pieces of an interaction that the opponent's monsters will probably have been used up. It doesn't even negate on your opponent's turn, leaving you basically with just a 3.8k beater, that will inevitably die to some sort of removal. Thor's sub-archetype is the Nordic beasts, which are all based off of animals in Norse mythology. One thing that the Aesir archetype does have going for it is actually the translation of real-life lore into card effects. Tangrisnir's effect, whilst undoubtedly awful, is a nice homage to the 2 goats who pull Thor's chariot, as when Tangrisnir is destroyed, 2 tokens are placed on the field. For a fun fact, Thor's hammer in his artwork is different from the art in the Trap Mjolnir card. The next of our Aesir gods is Loki, the Lord of the Aesir. Loki is a level 10 Synchro Dark spellcaster with 3300 attack and 3300 defense. Loki's effect allows you to negate 1 spell or trap activation during your battle phase. His revival effect retrieves 1 trap from your grave and adds it to your hand. Loki is the god of trickery, and within the lore he has an evil nature, as he has caused the death of Baldur, so this is reflected with his dark attribute. His role as a trickster and deceiver is shown with his effects, given that he can retrieve traps from the grave to help with his deceptions, and using his power of shapeshifting to get past any spells or traps used in the battle phase. Like before, Loki's basically a glorified beater, given that his effect is basically useless. His effect gives some sort of protection during your battle phase, in case the opponent is somehow running a battle trap in 2024. But even during the time at release, negating one battle trap for going -2 was extremely underwhelming. Even worse, the negation effect is only for your turn, so like the other Nordic gods, he reverts back to beat stick during your opponent's turn. Loki's sub-archetype is the Nordic Alfars, which are basically elves, and their link to Loki is a lot less concrete than Thor's and the Nordic beasts. However, they all still have a basis in Norse mythology. For example, Alvis of the Nordic Alfar was a dwarf who was promised to marry Thor's daughter. In a test to prove he was all-wise, he was given a barrage of questions till sunrise, where he was then turned to stone. For the last of our gods, we have Odin, father of the Aesir. Odin is a level 10 synchro monster with a light fairy type attribute, and a 4,3500 stat line. His effect allows him to be unaffected by spells or traps until the end of the turn, and his revival effect allows him to draw one card on summon. Odin was arguably the most powerful god in Norse mythology, as he was the king of the Aesir and also created the world. At least this shows with how he's likely the best Aesir card, even if itself is a worthless title. Being unaffected by spells and traps can be very powerful in a big beater, especially with a hefty 4k attack stat. But again, Konami fails to design a competent card. As it isn't a quick effect, this causes spells and traps to be chainable to his effect, meaning the immunity given by his effect is barely usable. Thankfully, there weren't many popular traps that were chainable, except from Compulsory, Trap Hole, Bottomless Trap Hole, Torrential Tribute, Solemn Warning, Solemn Judgment. Even if the opponent has no available method to kill Odin, he's still just as vulnerable in the opponent's turn with any spell or trap. His revival effect is just okay, nothing too crazy. Drawing one card is fine, but doesn't really affect how good the card is. It's sort of a consolation prize after your opponent easily gets rid of Odin. In Odin's artwork, he's shown with the two Nordic relics, Draupnir and Gungnir. Draupnir is a golden ring with the power to duplicate itself, which is shown with its searching effect of retrieving another Nordic relic. Gungnir was a spear Nordic lore, which could strike the target with its power, being described as more powerful than Mjolnir. While it's not shown in Odin's art, another card that's connected to the Aesirs is Odin's Eye. That's a reference to how Odin gives up one of his eyes to gain infinite wisdom. Also shown in the card's effect, with the cost of negating one of your Aesir monsters, which simulates giving up one of Odin's eyes, to gain insight into every card on an opponent's hand and set cards on the field. Odin's sub-archetype is the Nordic Ascendants, which are a group of monsters based in divine and human creatures in Norse mythology, with connections to Odin. Nordic Ascendant Mimir is actually the figure that Odin gave his eye to. Nordic Ascendant Valkyrie is based on the Valkyries who would transport dead warriors to Valhalla, and the tokens that the Valkyrie summons in her effect, the Einherjar, were an army of warriors that had died in battle and were brought to Valhalla. But that's all for the Nordic gods. Remember to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. I've already covered 3 hidden gods of Yu-Gi-Oh! That most duelists won't know about, and also the 3 wicked gods. If you want me to cover more of the remaining gods, feel free to let me know.